As a successful event planner, I, Lauren, had attended my fair share of parties. But there was something about this particular one that felt different. Maybe it was the luxurious venue, the sparkling champagne, or the charismatic guest of honor, Jackson Jenkins. I had heard of Jackson, of course. Who hadn't? He was a self-made millionaire, known for his ruthless business tactics and his irresistible charm. I had always been skeptical of his reputation, but as I watched him work the room, I couldn't help but be impressed. We met by chance at the bar, both reaching for the same glass of wine. Our eyes met, and I felt a jolt of electricity. Jackson smiled, and I was struck by the warmth and kindness in his eyes. "Sorry about that," he said, handing me the wine. "I guess we both had the same taste in wine." We chatted for a while, exchanging small talk about the party and our shared interests. I was surprised by how easy it was to talk to him, how comfortable I felt in his presence. As the night wore on, we found ourselves gravitating toward each other, laughing and joking like old friends. I couldn't believe how much I enjoyed his company. Before I knew it, the party was winding down, and Jackson was walking me out to my car. We stood outside, chatting and lingering, neither of us wanting the night to end. "I had a great time tonight, Lauren," Jackson said, looking at me with those piercing eyes. "Would you like to grab dinner with me sometime this week?" My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this way about someone. "I'd love to," I said, smiling up at him. As we exchanged numbers, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held for us. Little did I know, our whirlwind romance was only just beginning. "Goodbye, Jackson," I replied, smiling back. "I'm looking forward to it." We shared a brief, friendly hug, and then Jackson turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I watched him go, feeling a sense of excitement and anticipation. As I got into my car and drove home, I couldn't help but think about Jackson. There was something about him that drew me in, something that made me feel like I wanted to get to know him better. I wondered what our dinner date would be like, and whether we'd hit it off as well as we had at the party. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and possibility. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something special. 2 days later, my phone rang, and Jackson's name flashed on the screen. I felt a flutter in my chest as I answered. "Hey Lauren," Jackson said, his voice warm and friendly. "I was thinking, how about we grab dinner tonight?" I agreed, and we made plans to meet at a trendy new restaurant in town. As I got ready for our dinner date, I couldn't help but feel a little nervous. I had been thinking about Jackson non-stop since our meeting at the party, and I wasn't sure what to expect. But as soon as Jackson walked in and smiled at me, I felt at ease. We hugged, and he handed me a bouquet of flowers. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I blueshet, feeling a little SY." Over dinner, we talked about everything and nothing. Our conversation flowed easily, and I found myself laughing and feeling more and more comfortable around him. But as the night wore on, I realized that this wasn't the romantic dinner date I had been hoping for. Jackson didn't seem to be flirting with me or trying to impress me. Instead, he just seemed to be enjoying my company. And you know what? That was okay. As we finished our dessert and prepared to part ways, Jackson smiled at me and said, "I'm really glad we did this, Lauren. You're an amazing person." I smiled back, feeling a sense of warmth and connection. "Thanks, Jackson," I said. "I had a great time." As we hugged goodbye, I realized that this dinner date might not have been what I expected, but it had helped our friendship grow stronger. And who knows? Maybe that was even better. A week later, my phone rang again, and Jackson's name flashed on the screen. I smiled, feeling a sense of excitement and anticipation. "Hey Lauren," Jackson said, his voice warm and friendly. "I was thinking, how about we do something different this week? Instead of dinner, how about we go for a hike?" I agreed, and we made plans to meet at a nearby trailhead. As I got ready for our adventure, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. I loved hiking, and I was looking forward to spending time with Jackson in a more casual setting. When Jackson arrived, he was dressed in hiking gear and looked more relaxed than I had ever seen him. "Hey," he said, smiling at me. "I'm glad you could make it." We set off on the trail, enjoying the beautiful scenery and the warm sunshine. As we walked, we chatted and laughed, feeling more and more comfortable around each other. The hike was a great way to spend time together, and I found myself feeling more and more drawn to Jackson. I loved his sense of adventure, his sense of humor, and his kind heart. As we reached the top of the hill, Jackson turned to me and said, "You know, Lauren, I'm really glad we're doing this. I feel like I'm getting to know you better with each passing day." "I know exactly what you mean," I said. "I'm feeling the same way about you." As we looked out at the breathtaking view, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held for us. As we sat at the top of the hill, taking in the stunning view, Jackson turned to me with a serious expression. "Lauren, can I be honest with you?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "Of course," I replied, curious about what he was going to say. "I'm tired," Jackson said, rubbing his temples.
"I'm tired of the daily grind, the constant meetings, the never-ending projects.
It's exhausting." I nodded sympathetically, understanding exactly what he meant. "But when I'm with you," Jackson continued, his eyes locking onto mine, "I feel happy. I feel like I can be myself, without the weight of the business world on my shoulders." My heart skipped a beat as I processed his words. "Lauren, I was wondering if you'd like to come to my office on Monday," Jackson said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "I'd love to show you around, introduce you to my team, and maybe we can even grab lunch together." I felt a flutter in my chest as I considered his invitation. I hadn't expected this, but a part of me was excited at the prospect of seeing Jackson in his element. "Monday sounds great," I said finally, smiling up at him. Jackson's face lit up with a warm smile, and he leaned in to hug me. "Thanks, Lauren," he whispered in my ear. "I'm really looking forward to it." As I walked into Jackson's luxurious office, I was immediately struck by the sleek, modern decor. Jackson himself stood up from behind his massive desk, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Lauren, it's so great to see you," he said, walking around the desk to greet me. We hugged, and I couldn't help but feel a little awestruck by the opulent surroundings. As we sat down in the plush chairs, Jackson asked me about my weekend, and we chatted easily, laughing and joking together. But as the conversation flowed, I found myself wondering about Jackson's past. Was he married? Divorced? I didn't want to pry, but my curiosity got the better of me. I said, trying to sound casual. "Of course, anything," Jackson replied, his eyes sparkling with interest.
"Are you married?"
I asked, feeling a little nervous. Jackson's expression changed, and he stared out the window, his eyes clouding over. "I never thought I'd be the type of guy to get divorced," Jackson said, shaking his head. "But life had other plans. My ex-wife, Emily. She was a real firecracker. We met in college, and I was immediately drawn to her spark." Jackson's voice trailed off, and he gazed out the window, lost in thought. "We got married young, and everything seemed perfect," Jackson continued, his voice tinged with sadness. "But I was struggling to make ends meet. I wasn't the wealthy businessman I am today." I listened, entranced, as Jackson's story unfolded. What had happened to his marriage? And how had he become the successful, wealthy man he was today? Jackson's eyes seemed to cloud over as he remembered the painful details of his marriage. But as time went on, things started to unravel, he said, his voice tinged with sadness.
"Emily changed.
She became more distant, more cold. We started arguing more and more, and eventually, we realized that we wanted different things from life." Jackson paused, collecting his thoughts. "She extremely thinks that money is everything," Jackson continued, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. "She always impressed from rich life. She loved the idea of being wealthy, of having the finest things, of being seen as successful." I nodded, understanding. It sounded like Emily had become consumed by materialism. "I, on the other hand, wanted something more meaningful," Jackson said, his eyes locking onto mine. "I wanted a connection, a partnership, a love that went beyond just wealth and status." I had always believed that there was more to life than just money and material possessions. "Eventually, we realized that we were just too different," Jackson said, his voice softening. "We divorced, and I was heartbroken. But I knew it was for the best." I reached out, placing a comforting hand on Jackson's arm. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "That must have been incredibly difficult for you." Jackson smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Thanks, Lauren," he said. "It's nice to finally talk about it. I feel like I've been carrying this weight around for so long." I smiled back, feeling a sense of connection with Jackson. Jackson's eyes seemed to cloud over as he remembered the painful details of his marriage. But as time went on, things started to unravel, he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "We started arguing more and more." Jackson paused, collecting his thoughts. "She always fell for money and was impressed by rich life," Jackson continued, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. "I tried to ignore it, to think that she loved me for who I was, not just for my bank account." But Jackson's next words cut deep. "One day, I saw her with another man," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I dug deeper and found out he was a millionaire."
My eyes widened in shock.
No wonder Jackson's marriage had fallen apart. "I felt like I'd been punched in the gut," Jackson said, his eyes flashing with anger. "I realized that Emily had been using me all along, playing the role of the loving wife while secretly chasing after richer men." Jackson's voice trailed off, and he stared out the window, lost in thought. I could only imagine the pain and betrayal he must have felt. I asked Jackson what happened when he confronted Emily about her infidelity. "I asked her about it, but she just shrugged it off," Jackson said, his voice laced with disgust. "She didn't even try to deny it or apologize. She just told me that she was tired of waiting for me to become successful, and that she deserved better." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "She had no guilt, no remorse," Jackson continued. "She genuinely believed that she was doing the right thing, that she was entitled to a richer, more successful life. It was like she had no conscience," Jackson said, his eyes clouding over. "I realized then that I had been blind to who she really was. I had thought I knew her, but it turned out I didn't know her at all. I couldn't imagine being in a relationship with someone who had so little regard for others' feelings." Jackson's eyes seemed to cloud over as he remembered the conversation with Emily. "I told her, 'Emily, if you've decided that you want to leave me for this other guy, then just be honest with me and move on,' Jackson said, his voice tinged with sadness. "But she wasn't sure. She was torn between the two of us, and she didn't know what to do." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by Emily's indecision. "She kept saying that she still loved me, but that she couldn't resist the temptation of a richer, more luxurious life," Jackson continued. "I told her that I couldn't compete with that I couldn't give her the life she wanted." Jackson's voice trailed off, and he stared out the window, lost in thought. "I realized then that our marriage was over," Jackson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wished she had been honest with me from the start, instead of leading me on and hurting me even more." Jackson's expression softened as he remembered the sense of liberation he felt when he decided to move on. "I realized that I couldn't change Emily's mind or her behavior," Jackson said, his voice filled with a sense of acceptance. "So, I decided to take control of my own life and move on. I left Emily free to pursue her own path, to chase after the wealth and status that seemed to mean so much to her." Jackson's eyes seemed to cloud over for a moment, but then he smiled, a sense of peace and closure on his face. "It was the best decision I ever made," Jackson said, his voice filled with conviction. "I'm glad I got out of that toxic relationship and gave myself the chance to heal and move on."